This is Giovanna Emilia Talamini, and she did something when she was 17 years old that caused her to lose her U.S. citizenship. Emilia was born in St. Louis, Missouri in 1891, and what she did in Cleveland, Ohio in 1908 caused her to be swept up in U.S. naturalization reform. She wasn't the only one. Thousands of American women found themselves in the same situation. So what did Emilia and these thousands of other U.S. women do that was so heinous that it caused them to lose their U.S. citizenship? They married men who were not U.S. citizens. In 1907, Congress passed what was called the Expatriation Act. One of the provisions of that act was that any American woman who marries a foreigner shall take the nationality of her husband. Emilia's husband was Girolamo or Jerome Dal Santo. Jerome was born in Italy, and he was not a naturalized U.S. citizen when they got married in 1908. Because of this, Emilia lost her U.S. citizenship, despite the fact that she was born in St. Louis, Missouri in 1891. Could Emilia and the other women who found themselves in this situation, could they get their citizenship back? Well, yes, under a couple of circumstances. First, if the husband became a naturalized U.S. citizen, then the wife would also become a naturalized U.S. citizen based upon him. The woman could also go through the naturalization process herself, with one big caveat. If the husband, for whatever reason, was not eligible to become a U.S. citizen, she couldn't either. So the Expatriation Act goes into effect in 1907. Well, throughout the 19-teens, this is starting to become more and more of a problem as women are starting to have more rights in the United States. Things really came to a head in 1920 when women were finally granted the right to vote. Suddenly you have thousands of women who were born in the United States but couldn't vote because they had married foreign men and lost their citizenship. Finally, in 1922, John Cable, a U.S. representative from Ohio, pushed through legislation to change this. The act was officially called the Married Women's Independent Nationality Act. Today, we just call it the Cable Act. What the Cable Act of 1922 did was repeal that provision of the Expatriation Act that stripped all of these U.S. women of their citizenship. The Cable Act, however, was not without its own set of problems. The biggest being the fact that it did not automatically restore the citizenship of these women. If these women wanted to regain their citizenship, they still had to go through the naturalization process. As time went on, different provisions of the Cable Act of 1922 were refined and amended. For example, in 1931, they finally changed the requirement that her husband had to also be eligible for citizenship. In 1936, they changed the rules so that widows and divorcees could regain their citizenship by petitioning for naturalization. They didn't have to go through the entire naturalization process. However, that was just good for widows and divorcees. Married women still had to go through the entire naturalization process. Finally, in 1940, they changed it so that the women who were affected by the Expatriation Act in 1907 could regain their citizenship just by taking an oath. It's worth noting, however, that at no point was citizenship automatically restored to these women. There was still always some sort of process that they had to go through. So, what happened to Emilia and her citizenship? First, I want to thank Carol Foster, who is a member in my Generations Connection membership. Carol asked in one of our monthly Q&As about American women losing their citizenship. Emilia is Carol's grandmother, and I'll have a link to that down in the description so that you can get more information about the Generations Connection membership and how it can help you with your genealogy. So what happened to Emilia and her citizenship? Jerome, Emilia's husband, didn't go through the naturalization process until the 1920s, after the Cable Act. So she didn't regain her citizenship based upon Jerome becoming a naturalized citizen. Yet on later documents, Emilia identifies herself as a U.S. citizen, but no naturalization records have been found for her. So what's going on? It's possible that Amelia was like a lot of U.S. women in this situation. Many women were under the impression that the Cable Act took care of everything. They never went through the naturalization process later because they didn't think that they needed to. Some women actually chose not to go through the naturalization process. They didn't see it as any benefit to them, or they didn't want to go through the time, the effort, and the expense of going through the naturalization process. However, thousands of women did go through the naturalization process to regain their U.S. citizenship. If you have a woman in your family tree who was born in the United States or who had become a naturalized citizen before 1907, and she married a foreign man between 1907 and 1922, it's worth looking for her naturalization papers. Ancestry and Family Search are both really good places to start that search. Researching the women in the family tree can be a little bit tricky sometimes. Check out this video here for more tips on how you can make more discoveries in your family tree. Happy researching!